Welcome distinguished guests, community members and media. We start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight, the Wiradjuri, First Nations people of the Three Rivers, the Wambool, the Kalari and the Murrumbidgeri, who nurtured this land for millennia. We pay our respects to Wiradjuri and all First Nations elders, past, present and emerging. Thank you for joining us this evening. This film has been commissioned by members of the Glanmire community, the Glanmire Action Group. Through this documentary, we aim to share with you details of a planned large solar plant development at 4823 Great Western Highway, Glanmire, and the need to stop this development that is already causing damage to our community. Tonight we will show you the site of the planned Glanmire solar plant. You will learn from local residents of their lived history and experience of this prime cultivation land, their concerns with this proposed development and the distress it is causing them. You will learn of our key objections to the planned solar plant development as we highlight the fallacies promoted by the proponent of the development, Elgin Energy Proprietary Limited, and the glaring faults in the New South Wales Planning Authority's planning process that disadvantages communities and leaves valuable cultivation land unprotected across the state. There is so much at stake here, and it is vital that this planned solar plant be stopped. Right now, around New South Wales, there are many farming communities, farmers, families and residents dealing with the great distress that comes from attacks on their livelihoods, their land, their emotional, mental and financial health by avaricious companies, most of which are foreign-owned, aiming to make fast money by developing large solar and wind plants outside the New South Wales State Government's declared renewable energy zones. Local residents are left to spend tens of thousands of their own money to protect their communities and the integrity of their regional development plans from large renewable developments on inappropriate land. One such planned development is a large solar plant proposed for 160 hectares of a 186 hectare site at Glanmire, a small farming community located within 5 kilometres of Raglan Village residential area, just 10 minutes drive east of Bathurst in New South Wales. Glanmire sits on the Green Plains, also known as the Bathurst Plains, or the Golden Triangle, just beyond Lithgow, within the Greenbelt land surrounding Bathurst, and it is the gateway to Bathurst and the Central West, sitting in the New South Wales electorate of Bathurst and the federal electorate of Calare. It is home to 53 families, most living and working on farms, cropping grains, grazing stock, raising children, and investing their time, money and energy in local small businesses, schools, and a wide range of social and cultural activities. Council regulations currently allow construction of many more homes, and many more had been planned before this proposed solar development came to light. Here, families and businesses are closely connected to the land, with intimate knowledge of the environment and the climate, and a strong commitment to renewable energy options used to manage the course of climate change. Elgin Energy Proprietary Limited proposes to build a 60 megawatt capacity solar plant with 250 football fields of panels, many of which will reach 5 metres in height, to be surrounded by a 9-foot high electrified fence with CCTV cameras on this 186 hectare site beside the Great Western Highway on prime cultivation land. Along with the tens of thousands of solar panels within the development area, it also proposes to install batteries, inverters, transformers, a substation and more. The leased term will be, it is understood, at least 40 years, well beyond the life expectancy of the current absentee landowner. Glanmire residents, the broader Bathurst community, all travellers and visitors to the region and the Greenbelt area will be left with this scar for many decades to come. From the outset, it is critical that opposition to this large solar plant not be construed as anti-renewables or anti-green sentiment. Nothing could be further from the truth. Glanmire residents believe in climate change. We live with the effects of it and work to reduce its impact. We believe in the contribution that renewable energy options can make to course correct our future. This is not an issue of Glanmire versus climate change and Greens. Our hands are in this earth. We must protect prime cultivation land. We must protect farmland, farmers, communities, and livelihoods. This is an issue of good planning and green in the true sense of the word versus avaricious applicants and disorganised planning. It is an issue of renewable developments proposals being given consideration by the government for a go-ahead on inappropriate locations, on land where there would be conflict with existing land use, primarily cultivation. It is an issue of the New South Wales state government's poorly legislated and executed planning process that favours development proponents. It allows applications to be made at locations it should not, and gravely disadvantages communities like ours. Farming communities such as Glanmire, but many more across the state of New South Wales, are left unprotected by the state government and held hostage to the money-driven plans of renewable development companies. 3 such companies have forced their plans on our region in recent years. Photon pushed their plans onto the Brawongal community in 2017. Elgin Energy arrived in Glanmire in 2020, doing a letterbox drop around the district, fishing to get a bite from landowners for their lease income. And the Eglinton community and farmland is also now at risk from a planned renewable development. These development companies want to get their own developments underway wherever they can, at whatever the cost, and regardless of the emotional and economic toll on our communities, and with no regard for the real long-term impacts of removing prime cultivation land from the local, state, and national economies. Landowners on neighbouring properties have suffered years of distress, worrying about the impact of contaminated water flows, fire outbreaks, and fall in value of their own land resulting from such a development. During their 2017 fight to stop Photon's planned mega solar plant on prime agricultural land at Brawongal, residents encouraged the New South Wales state government to allocate areas where renewables would be welcome, with a view to stopping the inappropriate development attempts, most of which were undertaken by company proprietors foreign to the country. The state government then identified 5 renewable energy zones, with the closest one to us, the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone, being the first to be declared in New South Wales in November 2021.
The Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone is approximately 20,000 square kilometres, centred by Dubbo and Dunedoo, on the land of the Wiradjuri, Walwyn and Kamilaroi people. The renewable energy zones in the Central West Orana, New England and southwest regions of New South Wales alone will unlock a significant pipeline of large-scale renewable energy and storage projects, while supporting up to $20.7 billion of private sector investment in our regions and over 5,000 construction jobs at their peak.
Renewable Energy Zone staff have revealed that these zones are now 9 times oversubscribed and that there is capacity to expand development within the zones as soon as the government funds the necessary infrastructure to allow these waitlisted developments to progress. Unfortunately, even though the New South Wales government has designated these zones, is funding the grid connection and other infrastructure, and is managing their progress, it has not prohibited nor restricted applications to develop renewable energy plants outside these zones in any way, leaving residents by themselves to protect their communities and regions and to suffer the expense, inconvenience and anxiety of doing so.
The consequences of this solar plant going here are going to affect our livelihood in the future.
I'm certainly not against solar farming. It is the future, there's no question of that. But there are places that are more appropriate for them to be built.
The planning process was introduced well before renewables. There was complaint, as I remember it, in the papers years ago that councils were holding up big projects and so the state government going to streamline that. And no doubt that happened, and it probably worked well for years. But then along came renewables, and that has introduced an entirely different dimension to the system, in that the renewables take up so much space. Everything that you read that is produced by our New South Wales government expresses concern for the health, well-being of the local communities. In truth, however, I've come to learn that the renewable energy zones had essentially no impact whatsoever on applications that are to be pursued outside the zones. Outside the zones was business as usual.
Has caused me so much stress over the past almost 18 months now. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I was so stressed, couldn't do any of my daily jobs.
It's of no interest to them what impact it may have on local people who live here.
At Burrawongal, after community members spent thousands of dollars of their own money gathering evidence and reports and conducting consultation to oppose Photon's development, Bathurst Regional Council voted to ask Photon to find another, more suitable site. Federal Member for Calare, Mr Andrew Gee, supported the community, as did State Member for Bathurst, the Honourable Mr Paul Toole, and State Member for Orange, the Honourable Mr Phil Donato. Paul Toole, now Deputy Premier, has a rural background, appreciating the land and the productivity of different soil types in particular areas, so his support came as no surprise, and may well have assisted in determining the outcome of Photon's decision to pull their proposal. We are hopeful for the same audible response and outcome from our opposition to the planned Glanmire solar plant development. We are hopeful of legislative correction of this very poor process. With the quality of the land slated for planned large solar developments playing a significant role in the consideration for planning approval, it is worth taking a moment to look back over the history of this fertile land. Over billions of years, the Earth was formed with a solid crust. Water was introduced, oceans took shape, and the planet became hospitable to life. Bathurst region sits on a layer of folded strata upon which several periods have impacted. Greater resistance to erosion resulted in a rim of elevated country around much of the Bathurst Basin. Huge streams cut through the weakest formations to form gorges and chasms. Volcanic activity occurred. As geological activity declined, this region acquired its permanent and current characteristics. Climate stabilisation led to cool winters, short summers, and a rainfall heavy enough to prevent serious drought. This led to the plentiful growth of grasses and trees characteristic of such conditions, and the combined result of all of this was the evolution of the valley, Bathurst Basin, into a fertile, well-watered region, rich in both animal and vegetable life. The property of the planned Glanmire solar plant at 4823 Great Western Highway consists of basalt, granite and alluvial soil, sharing its soil type with its immediate neighbours, particularly to the south and west. The soil at this site is helped by water movement. The land at this site drains to the south, known today as Saltwater Creek. Saltwater Creek flows into the Fish River, which flows into the Macquarie River, which in turn flows west to the Macquarie Marshes and beyond. The ancestors of the first human inhabitants and the original traditional custodians of our region came from the west, having migrated from Asia to Australia close to 60,000 years ago to become one of the world's oldest living, continuous cultures. This valley became home to the people of the Wiradjuri Nation, who cared for country with deep knowledge of, connectedness to, and heartfelt responsibility for its balance and health. Europeans made their incursion into the region in 1813, coming onto Wiradjuri land in its beautiful natural condition. The higher ground was well timbered. There were open grasslands around what is now Bathurst City, and there were less timbered areas in between. Surveyor George Evans, in December 1813, diarised the following.
I cannot see the termination north of me. The soil is exceedingly rich and produces the finest grass, intermixed with a variety of herbs. The hills have the look of a park laid out. I am at a loss for language to describe the country. I named this part Macquarie Plains.
Early European farmers believed the rain followed the plough and cleared the better land, over-cleared it in fact, to be used in particular for cultivation, the growing of crops. Shade trees were left on land to shade stock, but better quality land like that at 4823 Great Western Highway was cleared for cultivation. This clearing of cultivation land can be contrasted with the land just a short distance to the east of the Glanmire site, where trees remain, and the land has by and large been used for grazing since those early farming days. On the western side of the site, there remain clumps of trees on land not so suitable for cultivation.
That block of land in particular has been cropped every year, including the drought. And including in that drought, that block of land still produced fat lambs. Maybe not as many, but it still did.
Over like a period of, well, I suppose 50 years, and it's just been continual cropping and grazing, and been through some bad seasons and some good seasons. But it's just always panned out that, you know, it was as good here as, or better than anywhere else in the district.
I moved here starting with a couple of 100 acres 40 years ago, and my wife and I fell in love with the rural scene such that we kept buying more land and enjoying it and improving it. We've planted tens of thousands of trees, and we've practiced conservation work and all sorts of things to improve our environment over the years that we've owned our property.
All that ground from here right through, across from the Western Highway there, it's all the same. It's beautiful land. Too good to be putting it on the land like that.
So this solar proposal doesn't directly impact upon me in that it's a couple of kilometres away, but my enthusiasm for the land and the importance of the land I've learnt over the past 40 years, and I'd have to say to cover this high quality land with solar is abhorrent to me.
The early overgrazing practices and the devastation wrought by introduced species, particularly rabbits, led to a realisation by the 1970s that there was need for change. Farmers began to better understand their responsibilities as custodians of the land for future generations. For over 40 years now, the government and farmers have keenly pursued land improvement, with major steps taken to eradicate erosion caused principally by rabbits and overgrazing. Ploughing practices have changed, and minimal toll has been introduced. Looking around the Glanmire community, we see farmers practicing carbon sequestration. Watercourses have been purged of contaminants. Rubbish is now collected and put where it belongs. Farmers have embraced the government's encouragement to plant trees. On the eastern side of the Glanmire site, hundreds of metres of Indigenous trees have been planted on the rural property and the road that surrounds it. On the southern side of the block, several properties are beautifully maintained, with tens of thousands of trees planted after erosion gullies have been rectified, and native trees in particular planted along watercourses, resulting in exceptional water quality. Nature corridors have been formed by tree planting, providing accommodation for huge numbers of native birds and native wildlife, including wombats, wallabies, and even platypi. All of these changes for the better have occurred over the last 40 years or so. They have been done by farmers who are truly green in a real and practical way, and encouraged by government. Of particular import to the Glanmire and other development opposition is the classification and use of the land, as the planning authority seeks to avoid developments that conflict with the use of high quality land with classification of 1, 2 or 3. So now we know why classification is important, let's learn how the land is identified and classified and who classifies it. Bathurst Regional Council in 2014 adopted the Bathurst Regional Land and Environment Plan, or LEP, and also a Development Control Plan. The LEP identified the Glanmire land along with land essentially surrounding Bathurst and classified it as RU1, Rural Zone, Primary Production Land. RU1 land is better quality land. The Development Control Plan states one of the strategic objectives of RU1 land as to minimise the alienation of rural lands from competing and conflicting land uses. The concept was, and is, to surround Bathurst with a picturesque, rurally productive green belt. As you can see on the New South Wales Government's Seed Land Use Map of 2017, the majority of the Glanmire property is clearly identified at the time as used for cropping, cultivation. In 2012, the New South Wales Office of Environment and Heritage established a classification system to assist in the identification of the various land and soil capabilities. This system was called Land and Soil Capability Assessment Scheme and allowed for 8 different classes assessed on a range of biophysical elements, including landform position, slope gradient, drainage, climate, soil type and soil characteristics to derive detailed rating tables for a range of land and soil hazards. These hazards including water erosion, wind erosion, soil structure decline, soil acidification, salinity, waterlogging, shallow soils and mass movement. Each hazard is given a rating between 1 for best or highest quality land and 8 for worst or lowest capability land. The final land and soil capability class of the land is based on the most limiting hazard. A significant factor in determining the capability is how the land and soil is actually managed and used. Here are images that the scheme uses as examples of each class, remembering that this is what the actual land looks like as at May this year, under crop. The proven capability of the Glanmire land is undeniable. Land and soil capability is not assigned from a simple soil analysis, as Elgin's out-of-region agronomist would have us believe, nor can it be determined by desktop research, something Elgin is keen to note they have undertaken. The Glanmire community has spent thousands of dollars commissioning reports and research to support the evidence of the productivity and capability of the Glanmire site, and so the documented evidence grows. In December 2020, Town Planner Anthony Daintiff's commissioned report noted, "The land consists of Class 2 and 3 agricultural land," and provides maps identifying the subject land. The huge advantage of cultivation land is that it is suitable for growing crops, not just grazing, and the availability of land of this quality is limited. In his November 2020 commissioned agronomic inspection report, independent agronomist and agricultural advisor David Harbison states, "This land is a most valuable commodity to agriculture.
At this place, the natural elements, the quality and health of the soil, the temperature range throughout the various distinctive seasons, and the rainfall combine and interact to render this land with great productive potential."
And confirms its use for broadacre dry cropping, and notes of the site's land classification category.
This land is identified by the Department of Agriculture as cultivation land, and as such, is in the second top category. Only cultivation land that can be irrigated is above it. It is sought after for cultivation. It is sought after by farmers.
Well, since we were involved, that was about 1979 when we were losing it, and then we bought it in 87. And we just know, look, what we were able to do. Look, we put in crops in some paddocks, and we had a really nice line-bred flock of merino wool, and then like we used to get the really top wool prices, whatever the wool prices were, and for our sheep, and the whole district used to. Would get those, it was just top quality land. My husband and I have been farming here for over 60 years. We are primarily fat lamb producers, but over the years, Morris grew a huge variety of crops. He'd grown wheat, oats, barley, lucerne, and one year won the Western District's wheat competitions.
So all we have is, in this case, the proponent proposing the glaringly wrong position. If one has a look at the photographs, of the Planning Authority's own photographs of Class 4 and 5 land, and compare it with this land, it is abundantly clear to the layman even that this is not Class 4 and 5, and yet they say it is. And is there any shortcut? No. Okay, we have to put up with this imposition upon us for 2 years and incur all the costs of fighting all of the issues with no financial compensation at all.
Once those panels are erected, you lose that. You've lost the agricultural land. And in this area, we need grazing land, we need cropping land. Right across Australia, we really need to focus on food security. Every Australian should be looking at that first. Renewables are fine, but you've got to really look at everything that's going around with it. And in this case, it's prime agricultural land.
It had canola in it the year before last. It has winter wheat in it, I presume, this year. The year before the canola, it had oats. It's a cycle that the people that are looking after it at the present and grazing and cropping it, they stripped canola off it, one of the best crops you've ever seen.
Australia needs to consider food security today, and more land is being wasted really, and put to other uses other than food production. Our proximity to Sydney makes it easy for, there's not only wheat and other grain crops, but there's a lot of other produce grown in Bathurst.
For more than 150 years, land in this area has been managed, used and cultivated, and has been enormously productive for farmers, for the community and broader economy. Indeed, for many years now, this site has demonstrated a capacity to annually produce in excess of 560 tonne of grain, enough to produce 670,000 packets of pasta. This level of production corresponds well with the quantities harvested by neighbours. The area is an important contributor of food for the world.
I'm Andrew, I live over the road from the proposed solar farm. Been there for 9 years, lived in the area for 25 years.
My name's Tony Gulliver. I've been associated with agriculture and grazing in this area for all my life. I run a property that's 1,500 acres of what I call prime grazing land north of Bathurst.
It's in the Golden Triangle, which I've always known since I was a little boy. Everybody knew that was the greatest land to be in. Hence, it's taken me, I'm nearly 50, to get a small block in this piece of triangle, and then they want to put a solar farm on the greatest piece of land in Bathurst.
I think everyone's looking at renewable energy, and I don't have a problem with that. What I have a real concern, I think all Australians should have a concern, is we're talking about prime agricultural land, not just grazing land, this is actually cropping land. Now with the solar panels, for example, when they go up across the area that we're talking about, well, you can no longer graze it with cattle, but more importantly, you can't crop it. So its use as prime agricultural land is finished. And that's a real concern for me, because we need to look at our food security.
I don't think people on the other side of the mountains really believe or can see where their food comes from. it starts as grass, becomes their Uncle Toby's oats, and then with that of an evening becomes the dinner roast. So it's a production line, and I really believe they don't see that. They just, some of them just think they go to Woolworths and the milk's just automatically there. It doesn't come from the cow that someone's got to milk, or it doesn't come from the lamb that someone's had to grow, fatten, and then it goes to Woolworths. There is another line of that as well. And if you're not thinking about where they're going to go in the future, for where their food source is going to come from. There is designated areas with lower quality land for all solar farms, not very far from here. I don't know why they don't use them.
Real estate agents have recently described the land in this area as the Golden Triangle and a precious commodity.
One of the problems that I believe we have with this proposal for a solar farm is the value. Now, whether some valuers say it doesn't decrease or increase, I can assure you that you would lose buyers on the neighbouring land if it came up for sale.
When we start a marketing campaign for that prime agricultural land, it's really good. We have a lot of people wanting to visit us in the Central Tablelands. It's a great area to come to. It's also known for its picturesque location, its views, the scenery, but not only the scenery, it's also prime agricultural land which is suitable for making a living off. And there's been a lot of grain growing going in this area. There's been a lot of prime lambs, a lot of cattle, so it's prime agricultural land.
Talk about camouflaging them with trees, but I've been up at my place for 40 years. And in 40 years, when I went there was one dead yellow box tree, and I've got 500 trees growing. And in 40 years' time, they're as tall as this house. So that's how long you want to camouflage your farm. And it'll be sighted from up the top of Browns Hill, all the way down to till you go past it. Going to Bathurst, coming from Bathurst, once you come past Raglan, you'll see it the same way. And it's not right. Especially when there's ground within 5 kilometres of it, 2,000 acres, that won't run a billy goat with 3 fleas on. So 2 of the fleas have gone, and he's still struggling to live. Just over the 5 kilometres, and 100 metres over the hill from that, there's another 3,000 acres of ground that's useless to farm.
We have such a beautiful city. Obviously it's the first settled inland city in New South Wales, but here we travel along a highway. Now if they're going to block it with trees, which is what they sort of suggest, we then come into a fire problem. We have cropping land around it, not grazing land. Crops they can burn or whatever. In Canberra, I believe they have to have a 300-metre barrier around that, or a buffer zone around that. If we were to implement that here, which I think they should, it is then unsustainable because the land is not big enough to have a 300 buffer, which is, I think, what we need to protect the neighbours.
Just the beautiful green belt around Bathurst that we live in. You know, you've got cattle, sheep, different other hobby farms and things like that. It's just so rewarding to live here.
To think it could be changed by an industrial looking solar plant right next door really worries us.
Yeah.
Cultivation land, not grazing land. We have quite a lot of grazing land around, and if you put in solar panels, the thing is that you lose even grazing of cattle, but you can graze sheep, of course. But we have cropping land, which is really rare, and we shouldn't be doing this on cropping land.
In 2020, with Photon exiting the scene in the face of strong opposition from community and political representatives, the Brawongal Glanmire communities breathed a sigh of relief. The drought had broken. The community was close-knit, and the huge disruption and distress caused by Photon, a Warsaw-based company, seemed to be over. The optimism did not last long. That same year, the community learned that yet another threat was at hand, this time in Glanmire by Elgin, a UK Ireland-based company. This time an opportunist had flown in from Europe, formed a proprietary limited company in 2019, initially based in Queensland, then Darlinghurst, then Victoria, and now it seems back to Darlinghurst. With minimal assets, Elgin Energy Proprietary Limited has intruded into this area and is not legally accountable for what it says or does. If sued for a debt it does not like, it can simply send its proprietary limited company into liquidation. Elgin's so-described English and Irish connections have no responsibility to Australian creditors. And yet, in 2017, the Brawongal community was advised that the New South Wales Planning Authority had no real interest in the liquidity of a proponent company. Elgin Energy is capable of siphoning to its UK-Irish-based company, with its hope to make millions and no provision to finance any opposition to anything it says or does.
There are three arms of government in New South Wales. That is the legislature, the executive and the judicial. Many years ago, as I recall, the New South Wales government legislature said, look, for these significant projects, we're going to sideline the courts. We won't allow appeals to the courts, so they put them to one side, and the legislature assumed responsibility through the planning authority to deal with these matters. Now, you would think that in a democratic society, the legislature would then go about putting in place a system that was perhaps even fairer to the community than the judicial system. That is, nothing could be further from the truth. In order to accommodate the state significant projects, the court jurisdiction was ousted. And so you have the legislative government only running this show, right along with the executive, the planning authority, which is also controlled by the planning authority. The proponent has about 2 years in order to prepare an environmental statement. You know how long the community has to reply? 28 days.
Well, I actually only received a letter after the date that we were meant to have replied by to have a visual assessment impact study done at my home. I did ring them up immediately and say, I've only just received my letter. The gentleman at the time said, well, it was posted on the 10th of May. We had to reply by the 13th. If you're posting mail on the 10th of May, that to a rural area and expecting them to reply by the 13th, I just found that quite negligent.
If, of course, it was in the court system, the court would require the proponent to send us a copy of any expert report it received on the way through. And we would have a far greater time to do our own investigations. But unfortunately, the Planning Authority has no such provisions. There is no one at the Planning Authority with whom we can have, no one responsible at the Planning Authority with whom we can have contact in order to supervise or assist in any way during this process that takes years. In every amendment that one reads, the government expresses concern about the community and the health and well-being of people in the community. Having expressed that concern, I defy the government to indicate one amendment it has made in order to assist the community in any respect. As I see, there are none at all.
Elgin Energy has made many false claims that their renewable developments bring economic development to local communities. The fact is that this planned solar development will see grain production on this site cease, with some sheep kept to manage weeds. No cropping for strip feeding, no fattening of prime lambs or cattle with high quality nutrient-rich locally produced feed. Carbon sequestration on this block will also realistically cease. Mr. Richard Ivey, agricultural accountant of Wellington, has assessed the financial loss to Bathurst from the elimination of cultivation of this land as approximately $230,000 per annum. This income currently generated by the local tenant farmer is at present injected into the local economy. Of course, the economic loss does not quantify the loss of grain to the world food production. Notably, while the current tenant farmer is a local, the landowner is not. He is an absentee landowner, and any lease income he receives from a proposed solar plant will not make its way into the local economy. Elgin claims of the Glanmire site that the land is currently used for grazing with a small area used for intermittent cropping. This claim is in direct conflict with the demonstrated use of the land for decades, with the vast majority of the land used for regular cropping. A solar plant developed will commit close to 200 hectares of prime cultivation land to infrastructure for 4 decades at least, while Bathurst booms around it.
Every farmer in this area put in crops, always have, and they were doing that long before Morris's family came here. So and we've always had, you know, great return from the crops that we've had. Being on a highway and the laneway which runs down the side of this place, we've even had trucks that have crashed into our front paddock, like coming down the hill, and we've had fires in our front paddock caused by that. And there's also people who throw cigarette butts out of a window and cause fires. They start on the side of the road, but they spread very quickly. And I don't know how you would manage if one really started and wasn't controlled. It would be quite devastating, really, and people would, their first priority would be to save their own home and, you know, their buildings and their stock. They wouldn't be, I imagine, rushing to save the solar farm, and I don't know what effect a major fire would have.
Well, being a solar power station, it's very valuable, and I'm only quoting what I've heard, $200 to $250 million. The surrounding residents, if a fire ever started in their property and went through theirs, well, they will not get insurance, let alone afford it. So that's a big concern for the community, really big concern.
Another issue that arises is tourism in the Bathurst area. Huge numbers of people visit here because it's a heritage town, and there's quite a few B&Bs on different properties around the Bathurst area, around this area actually, and people come here to enjoy the scenery, the fresh air, those sorts of things. And I mean, you can see Mount Panorama from here.
I don't think it's going to be a good attraction driving into the oldest inland city, looking at all those panels.
People are coming, and that's what they want, and we want to keep it just like that and just not spoil it.
Yeah, well, we've been here living on this land for close to 40 years, and we're still here, and we're down to 250 acres now, but we still want to stay here until the day we pass away. And yeah, couldn't think of a better place to be.
I just think it's criminal. It's just that they can come in and take, you know, look, it's just such productive land, and it always has been, going back, you know, to my childhood. I can remember my father talking about Blarney and those places in there close to Bathurst. And I think for the people of Bathurst it's a real backward step, because I can't see what they're going to get out of it. Only just that a lot of jobs and that will be gone.
Oh, well, it's always been known to be terrific land here. And any time a place came up, it wasn't long before it was sold, you know.
And then, you know, people that they don't really know, but they say, oh, you know, you could graze sheep under it. You tried getting 500 acres under solar panels. That's 3,000 sheep. You try running 3,000 sheep under panels, getting them in 3 or 4 times a year, like for shearing and crutching and lambing and growing crop for them to feed them through the winter. It's just so out there that it's not, you know, it's unbelievable.
Thirdly, Elgin claims the project benefits to Bathurst include opportunities for both local and regional businesses who support the delivery and operation of the project. And yet, none of the research documents received to date from Elgin has been produced by a local business. Not the brochure, not the photography, not the agronomist. The Glanmire Action Group, on the other hand, has expended tens of thousands of dollars, all locally, to research and produce reports. Elgin Energy Proprietary Limited's brochure, produced well before any research or indeed a sod had been turned on Glanmire, states the site was not identified as highest quality agricultural land or biophysical strategic agricultural land. They based this claim on their early desktop research. With the New South Wales Government's large-scale solar energy guidelines noting large-scale solar developments were to be avoided on land and soil classes 1, 2 and 3, Elgin Energy's agenda therefore came to be to get someone to say the land was class 4 to facilitate their plans. Elgin had to combat the results of David Harbison's report. It had to deny or ignore practical and real productive history of this land and try to produce evidence that it was of a soil class beyond 3. Elgin took soil samples to do tests. It did not extend an invitation to Mr. Harbison or to the Glanmire Group, or to anyone else to attend the site when soil samples were taken. Nor did it retain anyone locally to do anything, and it came as no surprise when in mid-2021, Elgin's English director trumpeted a report from an out-of-town agronomist that classified the land not as class 2 or 3, but as class 4 and 5. Suddenly, the newcomer had evidence to suggest that farmers had been wrong for more than 100 years. Crops had been grown consistently for more than 100 years, and they shouldn't have been. Various government departments, including the Department of Agriculture and the Office of Environment and Heritage, that had established the land and soil classification system, had got it wrong. Real estate agents had got it wrong. We know this land to be prime cultivation land. It has the runs on the board to prove it. Elgin is a company that hopes to make millions. Elgin is untrustworthy, and the community is left, therefore, at huge cost to do their own research. The Department of Planning is an executive body planning authority established by the state government, and importantly and relevantly, it has been given special powers to approve so-called state significant projects, a term that large renewable developments, including the planned Glanmire solar plant, fall under. These special powers enable the State Planning Authority to set up its own procedures, with little to no regard for local councils, their development plans and controls, and communities. The current planning process for state significant developments, such as large solar plants, is demonstrably skewed toward developers who have significant funds to draw on and are given 2 years to compile reports to submit to the planning authority, and their integrity goes untested by the authority. By contrast, communities opposing these developments must find funds from their own pockets and have just 28 days to report on and justify their opposition to proponents' submissions. On top of this, the Department of Planning has no representative appointed to liaise with communities or opponents. The biases are evident, and the injustices to communities are numerous.
When the Elgin proposal was first raised, our state member, Mr. Paul Toole, contacted our group to advise there had been, he believed, some important planning changes. In particular, the creation of Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone and several other such zones throughout the state. The planning process had improved to allow councils a say at an early stage in the process, and the planning authority could decline a proposal or express an adverse view at an early stage in the proposal process.
The community's reading of the rules of the planning process provided some support for the Deputy Premier's views, and so we briefed experts all with the intention of assisting the New South Wales State Planning Authority to come to a decision or express an adverse view at an early stage. Glanmire Action Group obtained reports to support this early stage decision from a town planner, an agronomist, an agricultural accountant, and an insurance broker, to name a few. Elgin Energy had to consult with community and report via a scoping report to the New South Wales Planning Authority, and it seemed that the lodging of the scoping report was the point at which the Planning Authority could, as Mr. Toole had thought, decline a proposal at an early stage or express an adverse view. The community consultation undertaken by Elgin has been farcical. It became clear during the first consultation meeting that Elgin was not consulting so much as advising us of its plans. It had already set upon its course, and this so-called consultation activity was merely a box-ticking exercise to please the Planning Authority, with no check as to the integrity with which Elgin undertook or reported on its consultation activities. The Glanmire Group openly advised Elgin of the informed petition protesting its proposal and signed by nearly all residents within a 3-kilometre radius, and indeed hundreds more. Elgin was to meet with Paul Toole, and the Glanmire Group was confident, from Mr. Toole's advice, that opposition to the project would be clearly conveyed.
The so-called New South Wales State Planning Scoping Report required Elgin to report upon meetings and the results of those meetings. However, they did not do so. In their scoping report, they made no mention of the Harbison report on soil classification, and the soil report obtained by them has not been shared with the Glanmire Group or our agronomist. We were deprived of the opportunity of putting the accurate classification to the Planning Authority. There is no mention by Elgin of any community petition or number of objections. There is no mention of the result of the meeting with Deputy Premier, the Honourable Mr. Paul Toole.
Within days of obtaining a copy of the scoping report, our group wrote to the Planning Authority detailing its deficiencies. We were advised, however, that the Planning Authority had already ticked the box, and the next step, a Secretary's Environmental Assessment Requirements, or SEARS, had been issued to Elgin. The authority appeared disinterested in the correctness or otherwise of Elgin's so-called scoping report. In the face of further protests, the New South Wales State Planning Authority responded. It identified no procedure whereby the authority could decline a proposal at an early stage in the proposal process or give an indication, and would we mind if the authority forwarded our letter of complaint to Elgin Energy Proprietary Limited for its comment. We agreed upon explicit arrangement that we would be informed of Elgin's response. The Planning Authority agreed to do this. However, it has not done so. So much for the scoping report. Clearly, there was no need for Elgin to comply with the authority's own requirements. This was merely a box-ticking exercise. So much for the Planning Authority's undertaking to our group. It meant nothing. And unfortunately, it would appear that Mr. Toole's belief in an early determination procedure was unfounded. There has been no legislative change that truly assists us or protects our land, and this executive body's deficient processes leave us and so many other communities exposed and unprotected. Our state legislature and our state executive appears to not be in step. In September 2021, we received a promising document from the Planning Authority headed Proposed Infrastructure SEPP Amendment, Renewable Energy and Regional Cities. The document specifically makes reference to Bathurst. It noted the requirements for consent authorities to consider specific methods in determining a development application, with examples of these noted as the likely impacts of the development, including environmental impacts on the natural and built environment, and safety and economic impacts on the locality, the suitability of the site for development, any submissions made in accordance with the EPA Act or regulations, and the public interest. It also notes the New South Wales Government is proposing to amend the Infrastructure SEPP to, among other things, ensure regional cities are not impacted by utilities like solar that may prevent the expansion and growth of the cities in the future and could impact on important scenic qualities in these areas. It clearly states that matters for consideration would apply to lands within 10 kilometres of land zoned B3, commercial core, and within 5 kilometres of any residential land zoned R1, general residential, R2, low density residential, and R3, medium density residential. The community of Raglan is R1 residential and is 4.5 kilometres from the proposed site, thus within the 5 kilometre area as a matter for consideration by the Planning Authority. Surely these were matters the Planning Authority should have considered when assessing any proposal. Suggesting amendments as matters for consideration offers no protection. Nothing short of a prohibition will stop an unscrupulous proponent such as Elgin. The amendment is a toothless tiger, and anticipating this to be the case, we wrote to the Planning Authority in September 2021, welcoming the amended proposal but suggesting it should prohibit proposals within the distances outlined and take note of its own listed matters for consideration and protect cities such as Bathurst when considering proposals outside these distances. We also strongly suggested it is important for a proponent to demonstrate that they have financial means to properly resource their activities and they have the integrity to properly and truthfully report to the authority. We received no acknowledgement of the letter. It is the state government that presides over such huge, divisive intrusions at Glanmire and throughout our state, and will not engage with the community on any matter of concern. In the end, the amendments do not protect us, our region or our land. Surely our local government and state government do not want renewables on such proximity to the expanding city of Bathurst. Other major issues of concern include fire, insurance, contamination, and hydrology. With neighbouring properties surrounding the Glanmire site all undertaking normal harvesting activities in the height of summer, when there is a real fire danger, what is the likelihood of a landowner or contractor's typical public liability coverage of $10 or $20 million being increased to say $100 million to cover the cost if fire caused by their activities impacts the nearby solar plant infrastructure? In answer, our broker has advised that no insurance company properly informed would insure neighbours and/or the premium would exceed $100,000 per annum. Landowners would go bankrupt. Contractors would not work the land. This insurance issue is an insurmountable problem. When raised with the State Planning Authority, we were advised, at least before September 2021, that such an issue was not really a matter for state planning. We needed to raise the matter with the legislative arm of government, and we have done this. Of course, without doubt, burning solar panels produce contaminants liable to run directly through the neighbouring property, owned in this instance by Sam and Polly Bonanno, and into Saltwater Creek, just a few hundred metres away. Fire, hydrology, contaminants, etc., remain just a few of the matters we need to research in our interests and in the interests of the broader community and in the interest of our land. The truth clearly cannot be left in Elgin's hands. We close this documentary by emphasising the proven classification of the land and soil capability of the Glanmire site, the proven productivity of this prime cultivation land, the clear conflict of this planned solar plant development with existing land use, the fallacies crafted by Elgin Energy and submitted in its reports to the Planning Authority, and the clear and many deficiencies of the planning process that so many regional farming communities are finding themselves exposed to and victims of. So, what do we need? We need our Bathurst community, our federal and state politicians and our local council to defend the Regional Development Plan 2014 and ensure that Bathurst is not impacted by utility-scale solar that may prevent its expansion and growth into the future and could impact upon important scenic qualities of this area. We need them to act on the terms of the Planning Authority's amendments. We need them to protect our local communities, farmers, and prime cultivation land. We need them to protect us from the New South Wales State Planning Authority's deficient process by, for example, requiring a proponent to have financial means, making provisions for community costs, organising its own independent investigation, providing for the timely exchange of experts' reports, and prohibiting certain proposals except by leave granted by the Planning Authority, thus recognising this process is indeed an adversarial process. We ask our state member, Deputy Premier Paul Toole, to openly support this significant part of his electorate, to stand for his rural principles, to stand for his government's zones and undertakings to upgrade his government's infrastructure. We further ask our state member and all present to lobby our state government, our legislature, to stop proposals outside the zones without the leave of the authority. Stop proposals on recognised Class 1, 2 or 3 land without leave of the authority. Stop proposals within the 5 and 10 kilometre distances without leave of the authority. Stop proposals outside the zones until the insurance issue is sorted. It is beyond time that the New South Wales state government took account of the immediate and long-term damage being wrought by their own planning authority's toothless, skewed, deficient planning process and their broad-scale inaction to protect prime cultivation land in the face of a growing global food crisis and recently highlighted pressures on domestic primary production. Climate change is real. We are all living through the floods, the fires, the droughts, the weather extremes. Our primary producers, our crops, our prized exports of livestock, grains, fruits and vegetables are being decimated and supply chains disrupted. The productive land we have and the expertise to farm that land must be valued and protected. Amendments and guidelines are a step in the right direction, but there must be firm, clear action to protect farmland, farmers, communities and livelihoods, to stop the planned Glanmire solar plant development. Thank you for listening and for joining us this evening.